Starting abroad, U.S. President Donald Trump touched down in Singapore a short while ago ahead of his historic summit with North Korea's leader Kim Jong Un, at which Pyongyang's nuclear arsenal will top the agenda. Trump and Kim are expected to hold talks on Tuesday for the first ever meeting between a sitting U.S. president and a North Korean leader. Trump described the meeting as a one-time shot at peace. Such a meeting was unthinkable just months ago when Trump and Kim were exchanging insults and threats that raised fears of war in the region. And earlier, the North Korean leader Kim Jong Un also arrived in Singapore. A long convoy of the North Korean leader was seen going out of the Changi Airport's VIP area. He is said to have a bilateral meeting with Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong after today. Well, earlier we spoke to SABC correspondent Oliver Whitfield-Miochik in Seoul, South Korea, on the upcoming summit.
Well, we are expecting the two leaders to sit down and talk. For how long remains to be seen. The Reuters news agency now reporting from one source that is close to setting up the talks, saying that Kim Jong Un is expected to depart at 2 o'clock. Well, that is only a mere 5 hours after the talks are scheduled to begin. But top of the agenda will be denuclearization and how Kim Jong Un and the North Korean regime will hand over all of their nuclear weapons, and indeed what process that will take. The US would like for them to be handed to a US lab and for those to be deconstructed. However, there has been other analysts that have said it is perfectly within the realms of possibility for nuclear experts to go inside the country and to dismantle installations that are inside North Korea. And indeed that might be a safer thing to do instead of having a ship carrying potentially deadly warheads going on a long journey to the US, which could end up in some sort of strife. It is technically possible for that to happen. How long this will take is a huge matter of debate. Some of the experts that I've been speaking to have said if North Korea agrees to denuclearization, it could be wrapped up in as little as 2 years. However, one US expert says he anticipates it will take 15 years because of the scale of not only the weapons that North Korea has developed, but also there are buildings as well as energy firms that need to be checked out.
Essentially, from Donald Trump's side, from the US, what could we see him bringing to the fore in terms of the summit?
Well, what Donald Trump's key policy will be is if you can give up your nukes, we can look at easing the sanctions. And we know that's something that Kim Jong Un is desperately looking out for. 2 years after he took power of North Korea, he developed a new strategy, moving away from the military-first strategy that he'd inherited from both his father and his grandfather to a nuclear-pronged. One of the prongs was nuclear, the other one was developing the economy. Well, we know that the nuclear capabilities of North Korea have been realized, especially when it comes to weapon capability. Those intercontinental ballistic missiles that you were just mentioning there, Shante, with what the North Koreans say, have the range to reach the US. So it's now seen that North Korea has achieved its aims in that sector. What it now wants to focus on is developing the economy, and it's doing so by trying to open up a hotel resort region in the coastal town of Wonsan. It wants to be able to get other streams of revenue coming in, but it can only really do so once sanctions are lifted. So that'll be the carrot that Donald Trump dangles in order to try and get North Korea's leadership to give up their arms.
Now, apart from the changes that they are hoping to make in the macro environment, let's talk about the chances of peace on the Korean Peninsula.
Well, that is something that Donald Trump says he believes could happen. It could be an outcome for the summit, and it's something that would be hugely important here in Seoul as well as in North Korea. Now, the reason for that is ever since the two Koreas went to war in 1950 in that 3-year conflict, the conflict only ended following the signing of an armistice agreement, so an agreement not to have so it's a cessation of hostilities, really. Well, the US and China were signatories to that agreement, and they have to be in consultation for any sort of amendment to that original deal. Now, there's a possibility that the first thing that we will see is this peace deal that will be signed. However, we've yet to hear from South Korea's President Moon Jae-in about whether he will be travelling to the event. The sources that I have here in Seoul say that there has been no plans made as of yet, but they stand ready to deploy as soon as they hear anything. Now, as well, we haven't heard whether there are any plans for Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, to also be in attendance. So it is one of the things that looks like it will be the most likely outcome. As we've just been talking about denuclearization, Donald Trump had been saying that he anticipates that this won't be the final meeting that they have with North Korea, that he sees this as a process. So we could be seeing future summits and future meetings in the future, and also the possibility that Kim Jong Un will be invited to the US for the next round of talks.
Well, let's take a look now at how the two leaders got to this point.
It will be the first ever summit between the leaders of the two countries. The two men exchanged fiery rhetoric last year over North Korea's attempts to build nuclear weapons that could reach the United States. But tensions have since calmed considerably.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. He has been very threatening beyond a normal statement. And as I said, they will be met with fire, fury, and frankly power, the likes of which this world has never seen before.
The North Korean leader retaliated.
We cannot have a sound dialogue with a senile man who can't think rationally, and only absolute force can work on him.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary. That's what the United Nations is all about.
The entire United States is within range of our nuclear weapons. This is reality, not a threat.
I just had a phone call with the president of South Korea, President Moon, and they are in dialogue, at least as it concerns the Olympics, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
I told President Trump that in our meeting, North Korean leader Kim Jong Un said he is committed to denuclearization. Kim pledged that North Korea will refrain from any further nuclear or missile tests. He understands that the routine joint military exercises between the Republic of Korea and the United States must continue. And he expressed his eagerness to meet President Trump as soon as possible.
Kim Jong Un he really has been very open and I think very honorable from everything we're seeing. Now, a lot of promises have been made by North Korea over the years, but they've never been in this position. I think he did this because I really think he wants to do something and bring that country into the real world.
Then there was a meeting between President Trump and the North Korean envoy.
We'll be meeting on June 12th in Singapore. It went very well. It's really a get-to-know-you kind of a situation.
But Trump cautioned that the meeting was a process, not a once-all meeting.
A phone call with
Well, joining us now from Moscow is our Russian correspondent, Lucy Taylor. Lucy, thank you so much for joining us. Look, we've just seen historical insults between the two leaders, Rocket Man being one of my favorite. I mean, it's so hard to believe that we are finally here, but I want to get a sense of how was the reaction, because we do know that Russia and the Koreas are allies. What has been the reaction to Tuesday's meeting between the US President Donald Trump and Chairman Kim Jong Un from Vladimir Putin?
Well, President Vladimir Putin has thrown his weight behind these talks. Earlier this week in an interview, he actually praised President Trump, calling this a wise and mature decision to meet with Kim Jong Un. He said he hoped for a positive outcome, and he's reiterated that today at a summit he's attending in China, saying that he hopes for a good outcome from these talks. You're right that Russia and North Korea do have a good historical relationship. In fact, Moscow has a good relationship with both the North and the South of Korea. And in the past, Moscow has acted as a mediator itself between the two sides. During these negotiations, though, we haven't seen very much from Vladimir Putin or from Russia in general. They've kept a very low profile and seem to be happy with the international focus being on the US, being on President Donald Trump. That doesn't mean, though, that Russia is completely sidelined in these negotiations. In fact, Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, visited North Korea, visited Pyongyang at the end of May, so less than 2 weeks ago, and spoke to Kim Jong Un in person. He seemed to receive a very good welcome. He had a good reception. The tone of the meeting felt very friendly, and I think that relationship is going to be very critical here. He actually invited President Kim to Russia, so as well as seeing the Trump-Kim summit, we might also see a Putin-Kim summit later this year, and I think that good relationship does give Russia some influence over what happens this week.
You know, Lucy, with that support of Vladimir Putin and that statement that he issued last week, I saw the statement, but he says that he does support the move, but for him, he says that he's totally still in on any deal, nuclear deal that the Koreans will be offering.
Yes, well, I mean, Russia is working with North Korea. Russia has called for the lifting of sanctions against North Korea completely. But Russia also says that this should be a step-by-step process. It spoke about that it isn't possible to do this all at once. It wants this to be a long process, well, not a long process, but a step-by-step process with reciprocal agreements at each point. So for every concession that could be made by North Korea, it wants to see the international community make similar concessions regarding sanctions, and actually Russia has sees economic opportunities in North Korea, so it's possibly in its interest also for these sanctions to be lifted.
Let's expand on that point, Lucy, especially when it comes to President Putin. Are we likely to see him, or do you know if there are any current secretive talks for him to also join the fray, like the Koreans, to shut down on any future nuclear plans?
Well, I'm not sure whether President Putin will attend these talks this week, if that's what you're asking. He has been in China over the weekend. He's been on a state visit there, talking to President Xi. I'm almost certain that this situation will have been discussed between those two leaders, because both Russia and China have interests in and influence over the Korean Peninsula, both neighbours, of course. So I'm sure that there are discussions happening, that there are possibly influences being exerted, but I'm not sure whether we'll directly see Putin involved in the talks this week. But yes, I mean, as I said before, Russia has invited Kim to visit Russia probably later this year. It's very possible that might happen, so we might see further discussions between Putin and Kim happening in Russia, possibly even as soon as September.
What about Putin and, of course, Trump? Could they also be in those talks, Lucy?
Well, there have been discussions between them about a possible summit between Putin and Trump. Trump mentioned in March that he wanted to see that happening, but since then relations have seemed to be deteriorating between Russia and not just the US but other Western countries. Yeah. You'll remember the attack on the former spy Sergei Skripal in March in the United Kingdom, and since then several diplomats have been expelled on both sides. So problematic relationships, but there are still discussions. President Putin referred to that earlier this week and said that he's still keen to meet President Trump if it could happen. He said that European countries have offered to be involved in that and help to liaise between the two sides. He mentioned in particular Austria, which President Putin visited Vienna earlier this week and said that Vienna was a possible location for hosting talks between President Trump and President Putin. There are no further definite plans on that yet, and the whole issue is very sensitive, partly because of the allegations of Russian interference in the US elections, the investigations into that are happening in the United States. But it seems to be that it is a possibility for perhaps later this year.
All right, and Lucy, I mean, how have the Russian people themselves reacted? We get the president actually supports this move, and let's also explore the different ways which that the move could actually see aiding to stop the current tensions within the Korean peninsulas.
Well, Russian people also seem to be behind that. That's the sense that I have here. Of course, Russia and North Korea are neighbours. They share a land border. So for people in the east of Russia, this is a really critical issue. Any military conflict would be right on their doorstep. So they're very keen for peace and stability on the Korean peninsula. Anecdotally, it feels as though people believe there could be progress in these talks. For example, we've been speaking to a tourism agency here in Moscow which organises trips for Russians to visit North Korea, and it said it's seen a spike in interest in recent weeks. So perhaps there are some people who feel that this is a good time to visit North Korea, perhaps a more stable period in North Korea's history. Russia also has business interests in North Korea. It's very keen to relink the Russian railways with Korean railways, to build a pipeline from north to south. So there are lots of reasons why Russia would want more stability, would want these talks to be a success. Whether it actually will be, who knows? I think to go to the second part of your question, how will this ease tensions? Well, it remains to be seen, doesn't it? But I think everybody here breathing a sigh of relief that for the moment at least it seems as though these discussions and negotiations have been moved into diplomatic channels rather than the kind of angry rhetoric that we heard earlier this year or the end of last year between the US and North Korea, and the kind of suggestions of military power there. I think people here do have some sort of mistrust of the US, which at times the Russian government and the media encourages, but for the moment it seems as though Russia and the US have interests that are aligned for the moment. All right, Lucy, we'll leave it there and hopefully soon we will be discussing the Putin-Trump talks very soon. That is our Russian correspondent Lucy Taylor taking us through Russia's position on the Korean-US nuclear summit that is kicking off in Singapore. Well, for more on that summit, we're joined now in our Pretoria studios by Professor